The 17th century in Holland was a period where the country grew up.
The wealth came from all over the world, and it must have been really staggering and surprising for everybody.
People wanted to express their wealth, and there was an enormous amount of prosperity here.
There is a love for art in the Netherlands, and it grows and grows.
Something was moving and shaking here. There was a lot of artistic innovation going on in many different genres.
The amount of good painters in Holland in the 17th century is kind of crazy, and the amount of good paintings produced.
If you really start to look at these paintings and interpret them in the right way, a world opens.
Albertine on Fifth Avenue. The Cultural Institute of the French Embassy is one of the most beautiful places in New York. Thomas Kaplan, an investor, also likes to stop by when he's in the city, because France is Kaplan's second home.
It has been such a long time. I am so thrilled to see it.
Thomas Kaplan owns one of the world's largest collections of Dutch masters. It consists of everything from Rubens to Vermeer. His most prided pieces are 19 works by Rembrandt.
We don't have so many examples of art that one can point to having an enduring, transcendent impact. Rembrandt had that impact, still does.
Kaplan's art collection is set up like a library. Most of the time, it is on display in international museums. For example, in the Louvre in Paris, or in St. Petersburg's Hermitage. The Leiden collection was put together anonymously by Thomas Kaplan and his wife.
The old masters had become such a niche within the art world that even as we were acquiring a painting a day for 5 years, over 200 paintings, we were still unknown in the broader art world. You'd never see our names in the media, and we love that. But it also fit very much into the ethos of our plan for the collection, which was we did not want to live with the paintings. We felt that we were on a mission to take them from the private domain and return them, in a sense, not that they were ever there originally, into the public domain.
The works recount a time that shaped today's understanding of paintings as art and commodities. They are also testament to a century that many consider having brought forth the art market as we know it today. At the epicenter of this development were cities like Delft, Haarlem, and Amsterdam. One of the largest collections of the era can be found here in the Rijksmuseum. It shows that the 80 Years' War, during which the Netherlands liberated itself from Spanish rule, brought about an art historical revolution.
There is an influx of really very much talent. Artistic, but also wealthy merchants who dare to do things. So that's important. And they bring also a kind of taste with them. The North is really around 1600 provincial in comparison with the South. There it had Antwerp, there everything happened in the 16th century. And that comes all to the north in Haarlem, in Amsterdam, and finds a fertile ground here.
The Netherlands was born out of resistance to religious oppression. For that reason, its citizens were granted religious freedom. Word about this spread, attracting Protestants, Jews, and people persecuted due to their religion from many countries. Most came from the southern provinces occupied by the Spanish, today's Belgium. Among them were many painters. They sparked artistic innovation.
They changed it all. All the genres, landscape, still life, portraits, church interiors. They try to find their own niche with a kind of own style or own subject. And that's what the art world then makes extremely lively.
In the 17th century, millions of artworks were created. A lot of renowned museums consequently have treasures from this time in their collection. But why did such an art factory emerge in the Netherlands?
The nobility, for example, had lost its importance. The clergy, too, had become less important. The bourgeoisie and the merchants had gained wealth and were suddenly able to afford works of art. So there had been a change in society which, above all, had a political background and an effect on art and the artists. And that is what made this society so special in the Netherlands.
One reason for this blossoming cultural period and the flood of paintings was the extreme surplus of capital. It was generated through speculative and risky financial business transactions, seafaring and trade. This capital needed to be invested as profitably as possible by the wealthy members of the population.
The Netherlands established itself as a great maritime power and also, which is very, very important, as a significant trading power, and therefore also became incredibly important in the finance sector, something remarkable for such a small country. In 1601, the East India Company was founded, and in 1621, the West India Company. There was trade with Asia, South America, and West Africa.
As a colonial power, the Netherlands accumulated wealth that was rooted in the slave trade and the exploitation of people in the colonies, something that was only questioned by very few at the time. What happened overseas seemed a world apart. In Amsterdam, people preferred to enjoy their wealth and sought further growth.
If, for example, you take into account that in 1620 around 100,000 people lived in Amsterdam and that 50 years later there were twice as many, you can get an idea of how many powerful people came here to the northern Netherlands and fueled this heyday.
In diesen Teil kamen, in diesen nördlichen Niederlande kamen und eben auch dann für die Blüte auch sorgten.
This group of influential people consisted of rich merchants and patricians, among them the family of Jan Six. As a patron and friend of the most famous painter of the time, Rembrandt van Rijn, his portrait was painted numerous times by the great artist over the years. Almost 500 years later, his descendant, Jan Six the Sixth, is an art dealer for works by Rembrandt and his contemporaries.
Rembrandt got introduced to the family roughly around the early 1640s. And Rembrandt was by then really, a big rock star. I mean, he was on the top of his career. He painted the richest people of Amsterdam, and in the highest elite regions, he was known.
Rembrandt painted numerous commissioned works. He created a portrait of his patron, Jan Six, which is considered one of his masterpieces due to the masterful depiction of the inner workings of his mind. What was the relationship between the two men which enabled him to do so?
I'm still not really 100% sure what it was, because we don't have a little note saying, "Dear Rembrandt, you know, what a wonderful lunch. We are kindred spirits." We just don't know. What we do know is that at a certain moment in 1642, to very early onwards, when they met each other, Jan VI apparently gave his friendship book, his album amicorum, to Rembrandt, and he said, "Can you do something for me?" And Rembrandt made a wonderful drawing of Homer telling his verses to all the people around him. And then underneath it says, "Rembrandt to Jan VI." And of course that's interesting, because he could have wrote to Mr. VI, or he could have just wrote Rembrandt. But he makes the distinct notation of Rembrandt to Jan VI. He puts them on equal par. And there are several other moments where their lives crossed. So there must have been more between the two that made the connection.
Jan VI began studying works from the 17th century when he was a teenager. And he still believes today that you shouldn't be too much in awe of them.
I remember being very young and finding all these family portraits looking at you because they follow you everywhere you go. Quite scary. And I just overcame that by really looking at them, trying to understand that they were not owning me, but I was actually owning them by trying to understand them.
Art collector Thomas Kaplan also sought to understand the old masters from a young age.
When I was 6 years old, my mother took me for the first time to the Metropolitan Museum. And I remember going up those steps. And I certainly remember the impact that connecting with Rembrandt had on me. It clicked. And I asked my mother continuously, every week, "Please take me back to see Rembrandt."
Since then, the investor has come to own 19 works by the artist, more than anyone else in the world.
I remember a week in which I acquired 2 paintings by Rembrandt for less than one Andy Warhol that went to auction. This is discordant. If you ask me why that could happen, I would have to look no further than myself. I did not know until 2003 that one could acquire a Rembrandt.
It was the same for many other art enthusiasts. However, over time, more and more of them began attending auctions of the old masters, in the hope of discovering a few treasures to add to their collections.
We definitely see an upcoming market, also a lot of new young collectors, and young not in their 20s, but say starting from 40 and not as it used to be, say 10 years ago, starting from their 50s, or 60s. So it's becoming younger, it's becoming more popular.
We shall begin with the first lot of 5, lot number 1, by the renowned old master Rembrandt.
Many of the initiated believe that the works by the old masters are unaffordable. But a visit to an auction shows that sometimes it is even possible for people with a more modest budget to take home a real Rembrandt.
I will need to know now, going once, at 11,000, twice, and it is sold to you. Thank you very much.
If you look at graphic works, and especially when they come from such productive artists such as Rembrandt, the amounts that have been made throughout the years or even throughout the centuries in the case of Rembrandt are so extensive, it definitely, the price will be a lot higher if you have a first state of an etching made by Rembrandt himself than if you would have a 20th century copy of the original etching plate made by Rembrandt, but printed 3 centuries later. But that is also something which is really nice, because it also means that the art is available actually for everybody.
Today, anyone interested in conducting art deals with the old masters, collecting them, understanding them, must delve deep into the history of the Netherlands and its art. They will discover that everything leads back to one person, Rembrandt van Rijn, who has created works in Amsterdam's Jordanbreedstraat for all eternity.
This is the place where he created, in almost 20 years, many of his greatest masterpieces. The interesting thing about this room is the fact that it has northern light. So the lightfall was very important for him as an artist. And we also know from drawings that Rembrandt made how the room was furnished and what kind of props and materials he used.
Rembrandt stood apart from his contemporaries as he made a profit from the art market. But he did not allow himself to be sold short. He began taking on fewer commissions, preferring to paint for patrons who granted him artistic freedom, as Jan Six did. Rembrandt wanted to be free. He can therefore be regarded as the first modern artist.
He was also a collector of all kinds of interesting objects that of course arrived here at the harbor of Amsterdam from all over the world. He was very interested in what we would call exotic objects, stuffed animals, corals, shells, weapons, and he created a small museum for himself, and he was one of the first artists to collect in this fashion, and it was an inspiration for him. Some of the works he collected, some of the objects, he used them in his paintings, in his work, and others were just an inspiration for his creativity as an artist.
Rembrandt established his own art dealership together with his wife Saskia on the ground floor of his house. It is presumed that anyone who traveled to the city to purchase paintings was allowed to spend the night surrounded by them.
He created this fantastic business model that was, his own artwork. He also had many pupils here who paid quite a sum as a fee to be taught by Rembrandt to paint and to draw and to etch. But he also was an art dealer, so he sold his own work, of course, but also work by contemporaries, by older artists, and by his pupils. So he had all these different aspects of a business, and that really makes him a very interesting businessman.
Today, Rembrandts are only rarely up for sale, for only a fraction of his paintings are still privately owned. The remainder are in museums and will probably never be sold. Consequently, the works are in high demand.
We had a painting that we sold this year in a sale in New York, and it was a small Rembrandt. It was this size. It's one of the smallest Rembrandt in existence, and it was painted just after he went through a very turbulent period in 1640. So you try and see the brush stroke, you can see the light, and the way he tries to create a scene which we all know. It was Abram and the angels, but he puts a different sort of perspective to it, and we all tried to sort of grasp his spirit and the way he wanted to enhance the story with his sort of magic. But I'm not sure if he viewed it himself like that, but we all want to be close to that sort of virtuoso spirit of him.
In 2003, Rembrandt's self-portrait with shaded eyes went under the hammer at Sotheby's for over $11 million.
It's the self-portrait of 1634, and the signature is here. But when this portrait came in with us, it actually looked quite different. It looked like this, so you will see actually that, the whole clothing has changed, in the faces has changed, some is still the same, But more interesting even, from 1935, the picture looked like this, so with a very big head, with long hair, with the same fur color. Then they removed the head and a bit of the long hair, and it looked like this. This is around 1966. And then we had it cleaned by a very good restorer, together with the technical data they researched with an X-ray. And then, this was revealed. The fur color, I mean, there's another fur color, not with the golden chain. The whole face changed, and it turned out to be a self-portrait by Rembrandt. But it was painted over in the 17th century, so the restorer had to remove 17th century paint from 17th century paint, and that must be painstakingly difficult to do that. You have to use a scalpel, and he's very experienced, but he could only do a few centimeters a day. It's amazing what can happen to a painting which looks, totally different in the beginning. So we should be careful with this sort of paintings.
Since 2008, the self-portrait has been part of Thomas Kaplan's collection. And, like all his Rembrandts, it is always away on loan. When the paintings aren't on loan, a rare occasion, they are kept in secure storage a few hours away from New York. Visitors are not permitted. For Thomas Kaplan, however, an exception is made. The collector has not seen some of the paintings for years.
Wow. It really captures you right from the... My God, it's like being back with old friends. She was my first. You always remember your first. She was the one I actually kissed on the lips. That's the truth. Here, if you look, you have a doctor, presumably, taking rocks from the patient's head. And if you look closely at the painting, if you look at his face, you feel the pain. He's in agony. He broke the mold in the conception of what beauty was. He put aside all of the classical Italianate conventions and expressed his own sense of beauty. And he did this without inhibition. So whether it was intended or not, by breaking all conventions, he was a liberator. And all those who followed owe that debt of gratitude to Rembrandt. That's why I think he is so transcendent.
The centerpiece of Kaplan's collection is an oil painting from the year 1633, which is only a few centimeters in size. Rembrandt's Bust of a Bearded Old Man.
I could stay here for an hour just doing this. This is my holy grail. It is the smallest painting by Rembrandt. I thought that I was looking at the face of God. And I thought that it was one of the most beautiful objects that I'd ever seen in my life. This case was made for it by one of its earlier owners, and apparently took it with him everywhere he traveled so that he could put it on his end table and he could live with it. There was something about the painting which, as someone who was obsessed and is obsessed with the painting, I perfectly understand, that he did not want to part with it. When you look at the way that he paints the hair, the forehead, the beard, the everything, it is as close to perfection as anything that I've ever seen. It's an absolute gem.
Art dealer Jan Six was also able to unearth the treasure. In 2016, he discovered the first completely unknown Rembrandt in 40 years. Thanks to in-depth research, tenacity, and a sharp eye, he narrowly beat the competition to it.
I think the most important thing to realize when you look at a work of art is that for some reason, 400 years or so, people have mislooked at that picture. They misinterpreted the picture because that's the only reason that it's not in a big museum or it's not placed in the right context. So something is wrong, and we tend to call that a sleeper. The painting is actually sleeping. So what you need to do first is to acknowledge that. Don't follow what the general feel is. I believe you have this concept of the Neinsager and the Ja-Sager. So if you always say no, it's not by Rembrandt because, you're never going to discover anything. If you say, yeah, it might be by Rembrandt, you're not saying it is, but you leave the option open to think out of the box and to be more positive about it, you have a very good chance that somehow, somewhere, you will discover a potential Rembrandt.
Art dealers like Six work with a painting for years in the hope that Rembrandt researchers will confirm its authenticity. In the end, science decides the fate of what was often an intuitive discovery.
If you look at a portrait by Rembrandt, always the person who is portrayed is looking at you instead of you looking at the person. It's this uneasy feeling if somebody is looking at you. And if you turn your gaze away, you feel, hey, somebody's still looking at me. This is slightly unsettling. That is sort of how I can explain it with portraits. Once you see it, it hits you. And so there must be an immediate contact. That's one, that's sort of the stomach feeling concept.
Six also had a gut feeling when he saw the painting Portrait of a Young Man at an auction. Announced as a work from Rembrandt's Circle.
I looked at that painting and immediately thought, hang on, this is much better than the auction house is telling us. And the moment that really made the click for me was a technical problem. This portrait shows a young man wearing a very distinct piece of lace work. And that lace came into fashion at a very distinct time. So the painting can't be before 1631 or 32. And then with fashion, it's exactly the same as nowadays. Fashion counts for young people. It doesn't count for old people. But in this case, you see a very young boy. You know, he literally doesn't really have a mustache or a beard. I mean, his cheeks are so pinkish, he's real young. And so he's wearing this lace. The auction house presented it as a painting from the Circle of Rembrandt. Well, if you look at the fashion, that was just not possible, because the fashion with the young boy, it had to be between 1631-2 and 1634-5 tops. But most likely around 33-34. It's that distinct. Now remember, at that time, he didn't have a circle.
Following the advice of Jan Six, an investor bought the painting for £137,000 at the time. Today, it has been confirmed as a genuine Rembrandt and is worth many times that amount. For Rembrandt, portraits were often a bread and butter business, commissioned works for the wealthy bourgeoisie. The nobility, on the other hand, preferred historical paintings.
In fact, history, biblical history, had always been at the top of the hierarchy. A short while later, in 17th century Netherlands, landscapes slowly started to rise in popularity, followed by portraits, and then, at some point, genre painting.
Genre paintings depicted very mundane scenes from everyday life. They were mainly collected by the lower classes, who bought them at markets and through lotteries. Genre art was very popular in the Netherlands. In other countries, people were surprised by the taste of the Dutch.
They were indeed shocked and sneered at the ugliness of what was portrayed. And they just thought that the figures in the scenes were incredibly ugly. It was considered as something outrageous to be able to observe these people in what were often exaggerated scenes, as they drank or fought, living life excessively. This was considered improper. It was new to display emotions, feelings, people in the heat of the moment so unashamedly.
Genre paintings also served an educational purpose. This is what it looks like when you lose control, the paintings seem to state mockingly. Today, museum goers tend to pay less attention to the works. Unlike this prestigious large-scale painting, Rembrandt's The Night Watch, which draws visitors in droves and is considered to be the most valuable painting in the Netherlands. That is why it is currently being extensively examined.
What becomes more and more aware is that we thought a little bit, and after painting has been painted, it's over. Nothing changes. But of course, there are all kinds of chemical reactions going on, and this will continue always. So paint will change in color, things will bloop out, or this is a little bit extreme, but painting is a living material, or at least things happen.
Ja, echt zo van oké.
It's extremely difficult if you want to paint 20 or 30 people in one group without becoming stiff. So he solves it with bringing a kind of movement in it. They are really, well, they seem to walk out of the canvas in one way, and that's of course brilliant. The first group portraits started in the early 17th century. And in 1942, he solves the problem. And nobody ever got that level, I think.
Rembrandt did not only draw inspiration from within himself. Artists in Holland observed each other closely and engaged in lively competition. The painter was certainly aware of what his colleague Frans Hals was doing in Haarlem.
Rembrandt looked at the Magere Compagnie as a source of inspiration for his Nachtwacht. Very difficult to substantiate, but we love to believe that.
One thing is certain. Frans Hals was the first artist, even before Rembrandt, to create large-scale commissioned works for the people of his hometown.
One of the most impressive parts of Frans Hals's oeuvre are group portraits of civic guards. Nowadays, they were a kind of civilian police, a bit of crossover between the civilian police and the Rotary Club. It was part of your status, because in order to get the uniform and the equipment, you had to pay. So you need to have a certain amount of money in order to be part of that civic guard. So it was a big boys' club meant to safeguard peace in the city. And the group portraits of Frans Hals of the civic guard are incredibly lively. We see them at parties, or if they're posing, it's a bit messy. They look at each other, it's quite chaotic. It's again this idea of taking the moment as if he had a camera and could just fixate a brief moment of interaction. And in that sense, they're a beautiful rendering of a certain strata of society at that time, but you also catch interaction between people, and you see hierarchies, you see party atmosphere, you see something going on.
Already during his lifetime, Frans Hals was known beyond the borders of Holland. Despite his fame and wealthy clients, he struggled financially throughout his life. He left nothing behind, except his impressive collection of works.
Frans Hals is certainly the first who showed the loose brushstroke, but he is a little bit separate. He finds something and he folds it, he develops it all his life. And that is, I think he wanted to paint a kind of movement and dynamism. He wants to paint life.
As is so often the case in the history of art, the value of Frans Hals' paintings over the centuries was also determined by contemporary taste.
One of the Frans Hals paintings I very much cherish is the Regentesses of the St. Elizabeth Hospital. And it's one of the latest portraits that Frans Hals has painted. He was probably in his 80s, so almost it's geriatric, even especially for the 17th century, that was unusually old. And what I love about the painting is that it's out of time. It doesn't fit with the 17th century. And at the same time, I also love the fact that it was both hated and cherished all throughout history. In the 18th century, you see in all literature that this painting was seen as absolute garbage, as the proof of the fact that Frans Hals, when he was old, had no control over his hand, and he was probably shaking, that him suggested that he had Alzheimer, that he didn't know how to paint anymore. That had a lot to do with the 18th century focus on the academic. No, painting needed to be precise according to the rules, and this was different. So it was really shoved aside. You see market prices of Frans Hals at the time also going down. It was not appreciated. And then suddenly everything shifts around at the end of the 19th century, because French collector and critic Thoré Burger, together with a large group of artists that he incited from Van Gogh to Manet, Monet, Singer Sargent, Mary Cassatt, Whistler, started loving this painting by Frans Hals. They said, it's an icon. You know, this is the proof that Frans Hals was an avant-garde painter. He was ultimately modern. He was ahead of his time. He paints like we do, realist impressionists. He had something extraordinary. And this painting was then seen as the absolute proof because of its loose brushstroke, its use of color in its dimensions of black. So it's amazing how one painting that basically stays the same goes through all these stages of being valued and appreciated, but also of being absolutely discarded. We're lucky that it's still here, because I think if it wouldn't have been in a semi-public institution in the 18th century, it would probably have disappeared.
Most of the art created in 17th century Netherlands no longer exists. But collectors, dealers and experts continue to hope another Frans Hals will be found, or another Rembrandt will emerge.
We come to people's collections, people's houses, castles, and we have to do inventories. And sometimes you go into a house and there's an old inventory and things are not on it or are on it or have been miscatalogued or not catalogued. And I love just go into a house or a castle or wherever and put the right name on it. Even sometimes I can't find it, but I discuss with colleagues or I try to do some research, but you discover who is who, or even a small artist, and I look in bathrooms, I look in kitchens, I look above the door, because you never know what you're gonna find. Around 10 million paintings were probably made, of which we now only have, they estimated 5% left because of the, I think got lost, got burned. destroyed, whatever happened.
One of the painters by whom only a few works remain is Jan Vermeer. His oeuvre is uncommonly small when compared with that of his peers, like Rembrandt, who created over 300 artworks.
Vermeer is an interesting example because we do think that he didn't paint so much because A, he took very long to prepare the pigments for his paintings, to paint. Then he didn't have to paint for the money because he was married to a very rich wife. And we believe actually he painted, well, if we look at his oeuvre now, I think there are around 37 accepted Vermeers, that he probably painted just one a year. But of course, we're not sure because we weren't there. And he didn't post his work on Instagram at the time.
Already during his lifetime, Jan Vermeer was able to charge high prices for his few detailed paintings, which he sold to wealthy patrons in Delft.
If we look at Netherlandish painting, we talk about the Trinity. You have Rembrandt, Vermeer, Frans Hals, the three big boys that we still remember today. And if you look at the oeuvre of Vermeer, that's very mysterious. It's very intimate. It's very difficult to understand what the symbolical meaning was, what the intention was. It's very domestic.
Vermeer was not only a painter, but also worked as an art dealer. Despite his talent for creating magnificent interior scenes and his proven expertise, he became impoverished at the end of his life. In 1667, he went bankrupt.
If you consider the interior scenes he portrayed, like these young women by an open window, often shown in profile, reading, those are very tranquil scenes, very introspective. There is almost something contemplative about them. These incredibly elegant dresses. He also really brought out the detail of the fabrics the clothes were made of. Also, the hairstyles, the jewelry. And there you can really get a sense of the wealth of the 17th century.
Today, many Vermeer paintings can be seen in the Rijksmuseum. Among them, this painting. The Milkmaid. It was sold for an impressive 175 Dutch guilders at the auction of Vermeer's legacy. At an auction today, it would be unaffordable.
Well, the Milkmaid, it's the combination of, I guess, the colors, which really are lovely, and the way that Vermeer puts a milkmaid in the center of the painting. It's so you're looking at not of a portrait of a noble person or an important person. It's a milkmaid, and there's such softness and sweetness, and has this wonderful structure. And I think Vermeer is a very special painter because he was really, out of the ordinary, one of a kind.
To some extent, the 17th century can be considered as the origin of our art system. It was when the foundation was laid for the art world as we know it today.
All right, we're in the gallery space here. This is his 17th century house. It very looks like a room where Vermeer used to work in the 17th century with the marble floors and the high ceilings. You can imagine Vermeer working here on his easel.
In the 17th century, the auction houses opened their doors. The profession of the art dealer and the group of collectors amongst the bourgeois emerged. Art underwent a democratic process, an influence that can still be felt today.
We furnished it with art as well. So, I mean, there is a connection, or we feel there is a connection between 17th century and art now. You're standing on the shoulders of giants. That's what they always say in art, you know? So, of course, we know about our heritage.
This also applies to artists who live in the Netherlands today. They must measure themselves against the masters of the 17th century, set themselves apart from them, develop their own unique style. but still be inspired by the technique and artistry of their predecessors.
It's not to hit the sitter if they fall asleep, but it's a maul stick. If you have to paint something very detailed, you use this to lean on to get a steady hand. Because if you paint something very small in detail, you can get shaky, but you use this as steady hand. And a nice painting where you can see how it was used is the beautiful Vermeer painting in Vienna, in the Kunsthistorisches, where you see painting from the back, leaning his hand against the maul stick to paint a small detail.
For Swedish painter Urban Larsson, 17th century Dutch art is an important point of reference.
I think the similarity between how I work and 17th century master's work is, there are several things. One is I work from life. Another thing is also, using northern light. I only work with daylight. Because I don't believe that a lamp can give the same sort of effect as daylight. And the materials are, in a way, quite similar.
Painters like Larsson owe an important innovation to the 17th century. For the first time in the history of art, the inner life of models was captured on the canvas. To this day, this is an important criterion for what makes a commissioned portrait a work of art.
Portrait painting is like walking on a tightrope, on this line above a huge downfall. You have to use your intuition. You just have to let go at the same time as you have to really think about every stroke, everything you put down on the canvas. And I think when you use this intuition and when you really get into it, that's the part where the character or the personality or the spirit, where it goes beyond just likeness. And that happens in the process if you are emotionally and completely into it.
No one was able to do so better than Rembrandt. That is why his portraits are so valuable. The Louvre and the Rijksmuseum had to acquire these two together. For Martin and Opien, they spent 160 million euros. However, the couple and their ancestors must be viewed with a critical eye.
They are symbols of the Dutch Republic. They are wealthy, they are young, they show that they love each other, they bring a new vibrancy, and that was shown. And we tend to forget where the wealth came from, but the wealth came from slavery, from a lot of trade in weapons and so on, and colonialism. And it's good to be aware of those things. And those paintings do change, or at least we look differently at them in one way. And we look differently at that age, and that's important.
How art from the so-called Golden Age and its dark side should be approached today is a subject of lively debate. But also to what extent artists such as Rembrandt profited from it. There are divergent opinions. An agreement has only been reached about the fact that there will be no second such flourishing era. It was an era that ran its natural course.
1672 is the rampjaar, disaster year. So then the Dutch Republic is attacked by the English, by the French, by the Germans from all sides. So it's really it's a narrow escape really for the Dutch Republic. They're almost gone, and after that the economy has to they revive in one way, and still in the 18th century it's still a very rich country, but Yeah, as said, it misses a kind of vibrancy or something. It's still there, it's still rich, but and certainly England and France, they are the real world powers then, and the Netherlands, it's not anymore. It's back to where it belongs, more or less. It's really a very small country.
But you have to understand that Holland was at that time so wealthy, so incredibly wealthy by all the wealth they amassed in that whole century before, that they didn't have to do a lot. They were actually retired, so to speak. And it starts to change in the middle of the 18th century, where the fortunes are diminishing because they're doing nothing, they're just spending. And then around 1750s, 1760s, they have to sell.
Also, their art, which spread across the world over the course of the following centuries, and remained there. Today, one of these paintings is only rarely returned to its country of origin.
I thought to myself, I'm not 100% sure what it is, but the whole build-up and the approach is very much like Rembrandt would used to work. So I decided to do a lot of research, and for the last 1.5, 2 years, I've been trying to place everything together to see if that could actually work, if this could actually fit within the oeuvre of Rembrandt. And Rembrandt has a quite distinct methodology, and you can see this in little details. The way he uses the ground tone for shadow areas, or how he builds up the shadow part of a face with the reflection of something that is reflected back to the shadow. All these little details, I'm looking at them, thinking about them, and that might eventually lead to a hypothesis to try to prove that this is actually by Rembrandt. Because again, this lady is looking at us. We're trying to look at her, but she is really making contact with you. And that is very, very rare in portraiture. So maybe one day.
In the not all too distant future, the next, as yet undiscovered Rembrandt will be resurfaced.